The glass doors of the precinct swung open with a soft hiss as a tall black man stepped inside. His polished shoes clicked against the tiled floor, his dark suit crisp, and a leather briefcase rested comfortably in his hand. He carried himself with quiet dignity, scanning the bustling lobby without a word. The station was alive with the usual noise of a weekday morning: phones ringing, officers exchanging reports, civilians filling out forms. No one paid much attention as the man crossed the room and chose a seat near the front desk. He sat upright, patient, pulling out a folder to review while he waited. But one pair of eyes noticed him. Across the lobby, Officer Riley leaned against the wall, sipping coffee and chatting idly with a colleague. His gaze fell on the suited man, and his expression shifted from casual to suspicious. He narrowed his eyes, watching closely as the man calmly flipped through his folder. "Who's that guy?" Riley muttered under his breath. "Doesn't look like he belongs here." The colleague shrugged. "Probably here to see someone." "Leave him be." But Riley couldn't. He frowned, his mind racing with assumptions. To him, the sight of a black man in a tailored suit, sitting quietly in the police station as if he owned the place, was out of place. Threatening, even. The suited man, oblivious to Riley's growing irritation, checked his watch and returned to his notes. His composure only seemed to deepen the officer's suspicion. Riley straightened, setting his coffee down with a thud. His jaw tightened. "Nah," he muttered. "I'm gonna see what this guy's doing here." And with that, he started across the room, the steady rhythm of his boots echoing louder than the buzz of the lobby. The man waiting calmly in the chair looked up just as Riley's shadow fell across him. The confrontation was about to begin. Officer Riley stopped in front of the seated man, his arms crossed tightly over his chest. His tone was sharp, impatient, the way one might address a trespasser. "You lost?" Riley asked, his voice cutting through the low murmur of the station. The man looked up slowly, his eyes calm, his posture unshaken. "No," he replied evenly. "I'm exactly where I need to be." Riley narrowed his eyes. "This isn't a waiting room for the public. You can't just stroll in here, sit down, and act like you own the place. Who are you here to see?" The man closed the folder in his lap and set it neatly atop his briefcase. His voice carried no edge, only quiet patience. "I have business at the station. That's all you need to know for now." The officer gave a short, mocking laugh. "Business at the station? What kind of business? You got a complaint to file? A cousin locked up in holding? Because unless you've got a badge or an appointment slip, you've got no reason to be here." Several civilians waiting at the front desk turned their heads. The receptionist paused mid-keystroke, glancing nervously toward the scene. A pair of junior officers walking by slowed their steps, curiosity tugging at them. The man remained composed. "I assure you," he said, his tone steady, "I have every right to be here." Riley scoffed, leaning down just slightly, his voice low but audible to everyone nearby. "Listen, I don't know who you think you are, but you're not fooling me. People like you don't just walk in here like you belong." The words hung heavy in the air. Whispers stirred across the lobby. The man's calm expression never faltered, though his eyes sharpened with quiet authority. He spoke with measured restraint. "Be very careful, officer. You're making an assumption you'll regret." But Riley only smirked, convinced of his own authority. "We'll see about that." And the tension in the room tightened, every pair of eyes waiting for what would happen next. The buzz of the precinct slowly dimmed as Officer Riley's voice rose. He planted his hands on his belt, puffing himself up, as though to remind everyone who had the power here. "I said you need to leave," Riley barked, his tone sharp enough to silence a ringing phone at the front desk. "This isn't a lounge, and we don't let strangers loiter in the station. Get up and walk out before I throw you out myself." The suited man didn't move. His posture remained straight, his gaze steady. He spoke with the same even calm that had carried him from the moment he stepped into the station. "I'm not going anywhere. I belong here more than you realize." Gasps and murmurs rippled through the lobby. A mother clutching her young son whispered, "Why is he talking to him like that?" A clerk shifted uneasily behind the glass, her eyes flicking between the officer and the man in the suit. Riley's face darkened with frustration. "Don't test me," he snapped. His voice boomed across the room now, drawing the full attention of every officer and civilian within earshot. You've got no authority here. Either you walk out that door, or I'll have you cuffed for trespassing." The man slowly rose to his feet, his briefcase in one hand, his folder tucked neatly beneath his arm. He stood taller than Riley, his presence commanding without a single shout. The crowd held its breath. "I told you," the man said, his voice low but resonant. "You are making a mistake." But Riley only sneered, mistaking composure for weakness. Big words for someone about to be escorted out. Laughter from one or two younger officers trickled through the silence, though their bravado faltered when they saw how still and watchful the civilians had become. The atmosphere shifted, no longer curiosity, but discomfort, even unease. The man adjusted his cufflinks, a picture of calm dignity in the face of public humiliation. Around them, the tension crackled like a storm about to break, and though Riley believed he was winning the standoff, every second was only tightening the noose of his own arrogance. The lobby felt frozen, every eye on the confrontation. The man adjusted the folder under his arm, then reached calmly into his jacket pocket. Slowly, deliberately, he produced a leather ID case and flipped it open, extending it toward Riley. "My credentials," he said evenly. "If you take half a second to read them, you'll understand why I'm here." Riley didn't even glance at the badge. He let out a short, mocking laugh that grated against the tense silence of the room. "Oh, come on. You think flashing some fake ID is going to fool me? I've seen better counterfeits sold out of a trunk downtown." A wave of unease swept through the bystanders. A civilian at the desk whispered, "Why doesn't he just look at it?" Another muttered, "That looks real to me." The man didn't waver. His voice stayed calm, but there was a firmness to it now, a subtle steel beneath the composure. "This isn't a game, officer. You're refusing evidence because it doesn't fit your assumption. That is a dangerous mistake." Riley's jaw tightened. He jabbed a finger at the man's chest. "The only mistake here is you thinking you can bluff your way into a police station like you own the place. I don't care how nice your suit is. You don't belong here. And if you don't leave, I'll personally escort you out in handcuffs." A murmur of disapproval stirred from the lobby. Even some of the junior officers shifted uncomfortably. Still, Riley pushed on, convinced of his authority. The man straightened to his full height, his ID case still open in his hand. His eyes met Riley's with quiet intensity. "I warned you," he said softly. "When the truth comes, it won't be me standing embarrassed in front of this room." Riley scoffed, waving dismissively. "We'll see about that." At that exact moment, the door to the inner hallway swung open, and several senior officers stepped into the lobby. Their conversation halted instantly when they saw who was standing there and what was unfolding. Their expressions shifted from confusion to shock. One of them whispered, almost involuntarily, "That's him." And in that moment, the tide began to turn. The lobby doors swung shut behind the group of senior officers, their footsteps halting as their eyes landed on the confrontation at the center of the room. The man in the suit stood tall, credentials still in hand. Riley loomed before him, puffed up with misplaced authority. For a moment, silence reigned. Then, one of the senior officers, Captain Harris, a grizzled veteran with 30 years on the force, blinked hard, his jaw slackening. "Good Lord," he muttered under his breath. "That's him." Lieutenant Morales beside him nodded quickly, recognition dawning across her face. She whispered, "The new chief." But Riley, oblivious, mistook their shock for support. He turned halfway toward them, gesturing broadly at the man. "Don't worry, I've got this handled. This guy's been loitering here, trying to pass off fake credentials. I was just about to toss him out before he causes trouble." Gasps rose from a few civilians in the lobby. One of the junior officers shifted uncomfortably, his eyes darting between Riley and the senior staff, who now looked horrified. Captain Harris stepped forward, his voice firm. "Officer Riley, stand down." Riley frowned, confused. "What do you mean?" "I'm handling it. Look, he's got some phony badge and—" "Enough!" Harris snapped, his voice like a whip crack across the room. The entire lobby went silent. Harris's gaze shifted to the suited man, and in a single breath, his tone changed to one of respect. "Sir, we didn't realize you were arriving today." The crowd froze. Civilians exchanged wide-eyed glances. Junior officers straightened unconsciously, sensing the gravity of the moment. Riley blinked, bewildered. Wait, sir, what are you talking about? He looked back at the man who stood calmly, never once raising his voice, never once needing to prove himself. And in that tense stillness, the weight of Riley's mistake began to settle like a stone in his chest. The reveal was seconds away. The air in the lobby felt heavy, every gaze locked on the suited man. Captain Harris straightened his posture, his voice carrying clearly for all to hear. Chief Bennett, he said with respect, welcome. We weren't expecting you until next week. The title hit the room like a thunderclap. Gasps rippled through the civilians at the front desk. The junior officers who had been smirking moments earlier stiffened, their faces flushing with sudden shame. The receptionist nearly dropped her pen, eyes widening in disbelief. And Officer Riley? His entire body went rigid. Chief, he stammered, turning toward the man he had just threatened to arrest. The man, Chief Marcus Bennett, calmly closed his ID case and slipped it back into his jacket pocket. His gaze swept slowly across the room, not with arrogance, but with measured authority. Another senior officer stepped forward, nodding deeply. Sir, it's an honor. We've been briefed on your appointment. We are ready to follow your lead. The words sealed the truth. The man Riley had mocked, dismissed, and humiliated was not a stranger at all. He was their highest-ranking officer. The silence that followed was suffocating. Riley's face turned red, then pale, his mouth opening and closing with no words escaping. Just minutes ago, he had boomed about throwing him out. Now the realization left him standing exposed, stripped of his authority in front of everyone. The civilians whispered sharply among themselves, "He's the chief? Unbelievable." That officer tried to kick him out. Imagine the nerve. Chief Bennett didn't smile, didn't gloat. He simply adjusted his cufflinks, his composure unbroken. Now you understand, he said quietly, his voice steady as stone. This station is my responsibility. The crowd held its breath. Riley stood frozen, humiliation burning him alive. And in that still moment, respect for the new chief swept across the room, filling the air like a tide that no one could resist. Chief Bennett let the silence linger for a heartbeat longer, the weight of it pressing down on everyone in the lobby. Then, with quiet authority, he shifted his briefcase in hand and spoke. This precinct will be my home, he said, his voice even but commanding. And I expect professionalism, discipline, and respect to be the foundation of how we serve this community. And each other, every word, landed like a gavel strike. Officers straightened unconsciously. Civilians looked on with newfound admiration. The man who had been treated as an intruder now stood unmistakably as the leader of them all. He gave a nod to Captain Harris and Lieutenant Morales, acknowledging their respect, then turned toward the inner hallway. The senior officers flanked him immediately, their presence forming a natural escort. As Chief Bennett walked forward, people stepped aside instinctively, the crowd parting for him as though the path belonged to him alone. His presence filled the station, not with volume, but with the kind of authority that required no explanation. Behind him, Officer Riley stood frozen, his face a storm of shame. His earlier bravado had vanished, replaced by the unbearable knowledge that every person in the room had witnessed his arrogance collapse under the truth. He didn't dare speak. The whispers from civilians and junior officers were sharp and merciless. He told the chief to leave, embarrassed himself in front of everyone. That's going to follow him for a long time. But Chief Bennett never turned back. He didn't need to. His silence was louder than any reprimand. As the doors to the inner offices swung open, the last thing Riley saw was the sight of the new chief of police disappearing into his rightful place of leadership. Calm, dignified, and untouchable. The man Riley had tried to throw out now commanded the entire station, and the officer who mocked him would never live down the humiliation of that day.